Charles Dickens was never a very serene man. He was a bounding, palpitating man who leaped from a mood of great gaiety to one of deep depression. And he used to try and relieve these moods by organizing amateur theatricals. Now, in the year 1853, he had great need of relief. His marriage was on the rocks. He had a lot of debts. And then once in a while he would feel his right leg suddenly go numb on him. And this gave him a terrified feeling that perhaps he was losing his powers as a writer. For remember that Dickens was a very, very poor boy. And like many successful men who have been poor in childhood, he was terrified of ever being poor again. And then in 1853, just after Christmas, he stumbled, quite by accident, on a new and a very profitable livelihood. He'd been asked to read in public in Birmingham, England, his most popular short story, The Christmas Carol. He read it, and the next day he read it again to an audience of working men and their wives. And both times, the people fell at his feet. And that started the famous Dickens readings. He did one-night stands all over the United States and Britain, and he kept it up for 17 years. They sustained his self-respect, they cured his debts, and they also made him see the immense affection in which ordinary people everywhere held him. Now today, Mr. Emlyn Williams has taken out time from his current assignment, and he's going to restage one of these readings of Dickens. And so, at the identical desk, and in the same get-up, Charles Dickens will be brought to life by the person and the art of Mr. Emlyn Williams, who will read The Fancy Ball, an episode from A Tale of Two Cities.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. On the throne of England, a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face. On the throne of France, a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face. It was the year of our Lord, 1781. In both countries it was clearer than crystal that things were settled forever. France, less favored as to matter spiritual than her sister of the shield and trident, France rolled with exceeding smoothness downhill, making paper money and spending it. It is likely enough that rooted in the woods of Norway there were growing trees already marked by the woodman Fate to come down to France and be sawn into boards to make a certain movable framework with a sack and a knife in it. Terrible in history. It is likely enough that on that very day in outhouses near Paris there stood rude carts bespattered with mire and roosted in by poultry, which the farmer Death had already set apart to be his tumbrils of the Revolution. But that woodman and that farmer, though they work unceasingly, work silently. No one heard them. Monseigneur, one of the great lords at the court of Versailles, held a reception. Monseigneur was in his inner room, his holy of holies to the worshippers in the suite of rooms without, Monseigneur was about to take his chocolate. Monseigneur could swallow a great many things with ease, and was supposed by some sullen minds to be rather rapidly swallowing France. But his happy chocolate could not so much as get into the throat of Monseigneur without the aid of 4 strong men besides the cook. One lackey carried the chocolate pot into the sacred presence, a second milled and frothed the chocolate, a third presented the napkin, a fourth poured the chocolate out. Last night, Monseigneur had been out at little supper, where the comedy and the opera were charmingly represented. The comedy and the opera had far more influence with Monseigneur than the needs of France. Of his pleasures, Monseigneur had the truly noble idea that the world was made for them. The earth and the fullness thereof are mine, said Monseigneur. Yet the reception held by Monseigneur, though a beautiful scene and adorned with every device of decoration, his reception was, in truth, not a sound business. Military officers destitute of military knowledge, naval officers with no idea of a ship, ecclesiastics with sensual eyes, loose tongues, and looser lives, doctors who made fortunes out of dainty remedies for imaginary disorders, philosophers who were remodeling the world with words, and making towers of Babel to scale the skies with, all these exemplary gentlemen of the finest breeding were in the most exemplary state of exhaustion at the reception of Monseigneur, where every human creature was disfigured by the leprosy of unreality. But the comfort was that all the company were perfectly dressed. If the day of judgment could only be ascertained to be a dress day, everybody from Monseigneur's reception would be eternally correct. Such frizzing and powdering and sticking up of hair, such delicate complexions artificially mended. Everybody was dressed for a fancy ball that was never to leave off. From the palace of the Tuileries, through Monseigneur and the whole court, the fancy ball descended to the common executioner, who was required to officiate at the gallows in a gold-laced coat, pumps, and white silk stockings, and who could possibly doubt that a system rooted in a frizzed hangman, powdered, gold-laced, pumps, and white silk stockings would see the very stars out. Monseigneur issued forth. What cringing and fawning. As to bowing down in body and spirit, nothing in that way was left for heaven. Bestowing a word of promise on one happy slave, and a wave of the hand on another, Monseigneur turned, got himself shut up again in his sanctuary, and was seen no more.